Welcome back to Java with Miyoshi. We're talking a little bit about variables and constants today, and just about their naming conventions and those kind of things. So, variables and constants are ways that you hold data. Matter of fact, what happens is when you declare an identifier, a variable or a constant, what you do is you're telling the computer, save memory location for me. So if I have this final int c, that's just a constant called c. It says, hey, it tells the computer, save a memory location for an integer variable, or in this case, an integer constant. We're going to call it c, and we want to stick in the value 3 times 10 to the 8th. So all you're doing is you're reserving space, and in some cases, you are assigning a value to that location, to that memory location. So let's go back a little bit though. There are two types of identifiers. There's variables and constants, and they're very similar to math. Variable can change its value, and a constant always has the same value. Matter of fact, a constant will have the same value throughout the whole program, or in the case of Java, I guess it's through the whole class. And really, there's, besides that, there are also two kind of flavors to identifiers. There's primitive, and there's object kind of data. So when we talk about primitive, we talk about integers, floats, doubles, and booleans. Those are our primitive types. And then we also have objects, which we'll talk about later, which have a little bit different things, but they can also they have different properties and so forth, but they are actually objects, and we'll talk more about that as we start getting the object-oriented portion of the programming. When you create an object, when you create a variable, you actually go do what's called declaring the variable. So when I do something like int ABC, that's my variable, I tell the computer, hey, save enough memory for an integer, and I'm going to call it ABC. And then what's going to happen is if later on in the program I say ABC is assigned the value 3, that single operator there is called assign the value, then this says take that 3 and stick it into the memory location associated with ABC. So we're just kind of using some shortcuts here, because really when we say ABC is assigned the value 3, it's saying, hey, take the memory location associated with ABC and put the number 3 in there. So we just say ABC is assigned the value. Anyway, when you create variables or constants, what you do is you must declare the type. So these are my data types. Int, float, char, boolean, those are my data types. And when I name the variables or constants, I need to make sure I follow the rules. Again, if you don't follow the rules in Java, then you're going to, the computer's going to yell at you and say, hey, you can't do that. So the naming conventions, there are conventions and rules. The rules say that you can have letters, digits, underscores, or dollar signs in your variable names or constant names. And so I have int ABC, well, that's a perfectly legal thing. And the other rule, if you will, is that you can start the variables or constant names with everything except for digits. So you can start with a letter or an underscore or a dollar sign, but you can't start it with a digit. So these guys would all be legal variable names: int ABC, float, underscore x, char, dollar sign, name. But this guy here, boolean 10x, that would not work for a variable name. That wouldn't be legal because it starts with a digit. But all these other ones would be fine. Now, convention says you should only start variables and constants with a letter. And convention also says that if you're going to do a variable, you would start with a lowercase letter. And if you're going to do a constant, or where we do this with the final, is if it says final in front of it, then it's a constant. And most constants have a capital letter or all caps for their variable names. You should also make them usable, make them readable, so that you don't have to worry about documenting tons and tons about what they mean. Instead of having ABC, we might say, hey, use this as some great variable name like velocity or velocity of the car or whatever it happens to be that we need to be using there. And the convention would also say that if you do that, you want to have the first letter lowercase, and then each of the words after that, as you come to words, you want to make them uppercase just for the first letter. And then if you have a constant, you would separate those words. You'd make them all caps, and you'd separate them by underscores. Okay? So while these three here are legal, they're not necessarily following the conventions of readability or not using the underscore except to separate words in constants and having that $sign in there. Okay? So, let's do a couple more. There's a couple more things here that you should know. And that is this. There's these keywords called final and public and static. And the final just says this guy is a constant. So that means that it's never going to be different. It's final because that says, hey, I'm finalized. It's not going to be anything other than that ever in the program. Public says it's available for my whole class, and we'll talk about that more as we go along. And static says it's procedural programming, not object-oriented. So if I have a static variable, that just says, or a static class, or a static whatever, it just says, hey, this is kind of procedural. I'm not worried about this being object-oriented, and so forth. So those are some, by the way, keywords in the Eclipse IDE show up as magenta, and so if you see those magenta words, you'll realize, hey, I can't use that, so I couldn't use final or public or static or integer or float or double or boolean. I can't use those as variable names or as names of classes or those kind of things. So follow the name conventions, make your code readable, actually do nice, neat, beautiful variable names and constant names instead of cryptic and short, maybe lazy variable names. So variables and constants, they're fun to use. They're actually just, remember, they're just creating memory space for the compiler, telling the computer to save space for them, and then filling that space up. So variables and constants, and just a little bit of smattering of how to start with them, and we'll talk about them much more as we get into math and other things as we learn more about Java. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Java with Miyoshi.